I'm Melissa Moore, a 31-year-old senior project manager. I felt genuine happiness, smiling at my brother's perfect wedding. During the toast, my father caught my eye and signaled me away. His smile was predatory. That's when I knew they weren't just here for Chris. They wanted the $1.5 penthouse I'd bought. A day of love was twisting into a tense confrontation. My father barked, "Chris needs this penthouse. You're single, sign it over." I stood firm. "No, it's mine. I earned it." The word detonated their perfect world. My mother gasped. Then his hand struck my face before 200 guests. Silence fell. The crowd's gasp was the loudest sound of all. That slap wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. What came next would shatter everything they thought they controlled. Would I finally break? Or would I finally break? Or would I rise? To understand why a father would strike his daughter in front of 200 wedding guests, you have to rewind 30 years. We grew up in Portland, Oregon, in what looked like a respectable middle-class family, but inside there was one unspoken rule. Chris was the golden boy. His life was the family centerpiece, every whim funded, every milestone celebrated. New sneakers, the latest consoles, elite sports camps, no expense was spared. I, on the other hand, was the designated saver, constantly reminded money was tight. For me, it meant hand-me-downs worn thin, second-hand games, and endless lectures about being reasonable. The harshest cut wasn't material, it was psychological. I was conditioned to shrink my expectations, to survive on scraps of attention, and to accept that the family's resources, dreams, and pride were reserved for Chris. My role was never to shine, only to endure in silence. The family motto was never written, but I heard it in every sidelong glance and quiet dismissal. Chris is the future. His smallest whim dictated the household agenda, while my report cards and hard-won achievements barely earned a nod. I was just Melissa, the dependable daughter who needed nothing, expected to live quietly, cheaply, and invisibly. Their unspoken script for me was almost Victorian: marry well, take a new name, and never burden the family with financial or emotional needs. Chris required every dollar, every ounce of attention to become important. I was told my value lay in finding a man who already was. So when I bought my own $1.5 million penthouse, it wasn't celebrated as success, it was branded a misallocation. My independence, my hard-earned power, wasn't pride to them. It was simply an asset they believed should have been redirected to Chris's endless future. I knew early my self-worth couldn't rely on my parents' approval. Chris consumed their resources, so I carved my escape through education and radical competence. I chose finance at the University of Washington with no family funding and no requests for help. I earned scholarships, hustled part-time jobs, and endured sleepless nights just to stay afloat. My college years weren't glamorous, they were a grind of tutoring, waiting tables, and chasing every grant. Yet every bill I paid was a victory. Dollar by dollar, I built a fortress of independence they could never claim or control. My destiny was mine alone. My parents' physical support was painfully visible, but surgically directed. They showed up and cheered wildly at Chris's football games, even the most pointless ones, their presence a blinding, flashing spotlight. Their loud, dramatic cheers for his struggles were always more enthusiastic than any brief, quiet applause for my actual, hard-won successes. Yet they skipped every single one of my pivotal university events, my major intercollegiate finance debates, unseen, the track meets where I pushed through exhaustion and pain, completely unattended. My academic victories, my scholarships, they were always treated as quiet, expected duties that required no public recognition. It was then I realized the bitter truth: my value wasn't just low, it was non-existent when compared to their relentless, desperate investment in his fragile potential. The constant comparison was the emotional weapon they used to keep me perpetually small. I finished university with honors, a quiet, massive achievement I celebrated mostly alone. The cost was starkly visible. I carried $40,000 in student debt, a heavy burden I faced entirely alone, a constant, physical reminder of my isolated path. Meanwhile, Chris was still comfortably living in the glow of the golden boy myth, despite all evidence to the contrary. He consistently dropped classes, failed exams, and spent his semesters partying. Yet, every single time he failed, the family response was identical, pure unconditional enablement. They didn't chastise, they bailed him out. New tuition payments, rent deposits, and cash injections all constantly flowing, no questions asked. They were investing in his potential forever, hoping the myth would eventually come true. My proven, earned ability, however, was only ever an afterthought to their desperate focus on his failures. My persistence built an unbreakable, internal resilience. Every late night spent mastering a complex financial report, every difficult negotiation I learned to lead, these weren't just professional achievements, they were my armor. I was creating a shield against their constant dismissal, forging my identity and self-worth out of sheer, unassisted effort. But the emotional rejection never stopped. When I finally landed my first post-grad job at a major finance firm, a pivotal milestone that should have warranted pride, my mother's response was chillingly brief over the phone. "Good. Now you can start paying off those loans faster." No pride, no congratulations, just cold, practical relief that their potential financial liability was nullified. Every genuine milestone of mine was ruthlessly minimized, treated as less important than Chris's latest, self-inflicted struggle. His failure demanded their full emotional and financial investment, perpetuating the myth of the golden boy who just needed one more chance. My success? It simply removed me from the equation entirely. I was learning that their love was only extended to those who remained dependent. I had spent years repaying that $40,000 debt and proving my undeniable worth in the corporate world. I stopped expecting their recognition. I simply started demanding results from myself. My mantra became, work harder, get smarter, and leave absolutely no room for doubt. I needed my competence to be my shield and my hammer. By the age of 28, the relentless, isolating grind paid off. I didn't just get promoted, I became one of the youngest senior project managers in my finance firm's history. It was a victory I celebrated with quiet intensity. It wasn't handed to me through a networking dinner or a family favor. It was a position I had battered my way into through sheer, undeniable performance and technical mastery. But this success came at a steep, tangible cost, logging consistent 80-hour weeks, surviving on endless late nights fueled by takeout and pure adrenaline. I consciously traded holidays, skipped countless family gatherings, and sacrificed any semblance of a personal life for professional invincibility. I realized that true power wasn't found in a last name, it was forged in solitude. This was my hard-won new light, a terrifying, exhilarating independence that I knew would soon collide head-on with their ingrained entitlement. All that hard work, the missed life, the sheer, relentless grind, it all culminated in one defining moment. At the age of 30, I made the purchase that physically defined my independence, a $1.5 million penthouse downtown. It wasn't just real estate, it was tangible, physical proof of my personal success, built stone by stone on my own sacrifice and effort. This penthouse was earned through deep, sustained sacrifice. I missed countless holidays, skipped crucial family milestones which were always centered on Chris anyway, and canceled every single vacation for 5 years straight. The exhausting grind was, essentially, the high rent I paid to finally escape their emotional and financial control. Stepping onto the balcony on the 40th floor, looking out over the entire, dazzling city, I felt a sense of profound peace and ownership I'd never known. This home was my sanctuary, a fortress built only with my trust in myself and my ability to succeed alone. This was my line in the sand, the one possession they couldn't co-sign, couldn't influence, and, I desperately hoped, couldn't touch. It represented my freedom. The moment Chris announced his wedding, my parents opened the family purse wide for him. They lavished massive funds on every detail: a luxury venue, designer gowns, premium catering, and absolute spectacle. It was a final, extravagant display of their investment in his unproven future. The passive-aggressive calls started almost immediately, never about my work, but always about my apartment. My mother's voice, sickly sweet, would inevitably include a pointed, poisonous comment: "That penthouse is too much space for one person, Melissa. It feels a little showy for someone who should be focused on finding a husband." My success, in their eyes, was clearly an embarrassment. Their message was becoming terrifyingly clear: my hard-won success was not a personal achievement. It was simply a family resource that must be redistributed. Because Chris was finally getting married, his needs suddenly outweighed my entire decade of sacrifice, my student debt, and my professional mastery. Their entitlement knew no bounds. My father soon stopped hinting. He began issuing suggestions, then outright demands, all thinly disguised as sensible family planning. "Chris and his wife need stability, a family home. You don't. You'll move in with your husband eventually. Think about the family legacy, Melissa." Legacy to them meant guaranteeing Chris's comfort, never acknowledging my existence as a fully formed, independent adult. I wasn't a legacy, I was a bank account. I watched the wedding preparations intensify, knowing with a cold, absolute certainty that the real, high-stakes performance wasn't the exchanging of vows, it was the moment they'd corner me and formally demand my property. The tension was a physical thing, taut and ready to snap like a bowstring. I could feel the expectation and the entitlement pressing in on me from miles away. They had spent years programming me to sacrifice. Now, they expected the grand finale. The wedding day wasn't just Chris's, it was the final, inevitable battle for my freedom. The immediate aftermath of the slap wasn't pain, it was a deafening, absolute silence. The music was gone. The crowd of 200 guests, previously a blur of festive color, was now a single, judging, massive entity staring at the vivid red mark blooming on my cheek. I was completely exposed. My father's hand, the one that had just assaulted me, was trembling slightly, not with regret or shame, but with pure, incandescent rage that I had dared to use my own voice to say the forbidden word, no. My mother, in a final, devastating act of loyalty, rushed to his side, not mine, whispering frantic apologies to him for my disrespect and ruining the moment. I stood there, utterly alone. And Chris, the golden boy groom, he simply watched. There was no intervention, no defense of his sister. His golden facade cracked wide open, revealing only cold, entitled annoyance that I was disrupting his perfect, expensive day with my sudden, inconvenient drama. He was just annoyed he wasn't the center of attention. In that frozen, humiliating moment, the little girl who still, stupidly, craved their approval finally died. The physical sting on my cheek was nothing compared to the icy clarity that washed over me. This public act of violence wasn't a mistake or a moment of passion. This was the true, core identity of my family, a hierarchy built on control, possessiveness, and the willingness to use physical force to enforce their twisted will. All my hard work, all my success was just a valuable resource they intended to seize. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, and I didn't beg. I simply turned. I walked away from the stunned silence, past the judging, gossiping guests, past my parents' silent, furious triumph. Every single step I took away from the altar, and that perfect wedding was a literal severing of the tie, a declaration of a total, irrevocable emotional divorce. That walk wasn't a retreat, it was the first move in a campaign for justice. I left the penthouse, the money, the career, everything behind. All that mattered now was a single, burning need for them to finally feel what it meant to lose. I didn't drive to my $1.5 million penthouse. My survival instinct was screaming too loudly. Instead, I drove straight to the nearest cheap motel, the kind with peeling paint and flickering neon signs. The vivid red mark on my cheek felt less like an injury and more like a brand, a physical, searing reminder of their violent attempt to utterly own me. It solidified the cold, hard truth: to truly break free, I had to disappear. That night, staring at the disgusting stained ceiling of the motel room, the choice became terrifyingly simple. If I kept the penthouse and the prestige job that funded it, they would never stop. They would relentlessly use Chris's failures, they would leverage family guilt, and they would, I now knew, use public violence to manipulate me. My freedom had a price that extended beyond money. The entire $1.5 million asset was the very bait that tethered me to their control. It was the only thing they truly valued about me. To hurt them where it counted most, their finances and their public image, I had to be willing to burn my entire life down first, leaving nothing but smoke, confusion, and unanswered questions in my wake. I acted with brutal efficiency. Within hours, I drafted and sent a brief, ice-cold email resigning from my six-figure job. No notice, no explanation, no farewells. My reputation was now collateral damage. Next, I systematically transferred almost all my accessible liquid savings, less than $50,000, into a series of separate, untraceable accounts and crypto wallets. The vast majority of my financial life, I was consciously leaving it behind. The wealth I had worked a decade to build was suddenly meaningless compared to the taste of freedom. I typed a final, concise, and utterly devastating email to my mother. Since you value the asset more than the daughter, consider the penthouse and its contents a wedding gift to Chris. It's all yours now. Then, I methodically turned off my high-end smartphone, broke the SIM card into tiny, irreparable pieces, and took an Uber to a distant train station. I left my luxury life, my senior project manager career, and my past, high-achieving identity behind in that dusty motel. I had to become nobody, a ghost, to execute the plan. Because I wasn't simply interested in walking away from my toxic family, I was interested in ruining them from the outside. My departure wasn't a retreat, it was the strategic vanishing act necessary for the grand finale of my revenge. My new life began right there, on a midnight train, funded by less than 2 months of my previous salary, armed only with icy resolve and a burning desire for justice. A cold, calculated month had passed since I walked away from their public violence. They had tried everything: police reports, frantic, guilt-ridden voicemails, even ridiculous legal scene. But I was a ghost, unreachable, allowing their anxiety to slowly ferment into panic. Today was the day of reckoning, the day the ghost would finally materialize. I arrived at the luxurious penthouse building, not in my old professional attire, but in a simple, cold, neutral suit. I was no longer the obedient daughter they dismissed. I was a focused, dangerous professional carrying a surprisingly thin briefcase. My parents and Chris, the golden couple, were waiting in the opulent lobby. They were livid but attempting to maintain public decorum. They rushed me, their faces contorted, not with worry, but with manufactured outrage. "Where in God's name have you been, Melissa? You cannot just abandon your life." I didn't raise my voice. I paused, looked directly at the faint red mark on my cheek in my reflection in the polished marble, and then spoke with chilling, absolute calm. "I've been making necessary arrangements for the asset you value so highly. I'm here, as requested, for the transfer." Relief, a sickening, visceral relief, flooded their arrogant faces. The tension instantly evaporated from my mother's shoulders. Chris, the eternal entitled receiver, actually smirked openly. "Took you long enough to come to your senses, didn't it?" he muttered, confirming everything I had suspected about his complicity. They truly believed they had won. They believed their public assault and emotional blackmail had finally worked. They thought their prize was secured. My father gestured dismissively toward a small, private conference room off the lobby. "Good. We have the attorney waiting. Sign the title over to Chris immediately. Let's finish this." This was the final step of their conquest, the ritual completion of my servitude. They were ready to claim the one thing I had truly earned for themselves. They were ready to watch me sign away my freedom. We were alone now, in a cold glass conference room overlooking the city I had conquered. The atmosphere was thick with their smug, certain anticipation. My father, radiating his usual authority, placed the pristine deed on the table. "Sign here, Melissa. The attorney is ready to finalize the transfer to Chris. Don't waste any more of our time." They thought I was beaten. I picked up the pen, but instead of signing, I looked up. I let all 31 years of chronic neglect, of belittling comparison, of being the silent, expendable designated saver, boil over into my eyes. This wasn't just about signing a deed, this was about signing the official, irrevocable end of my coerced obedience and my relationship with them. "You genuinely think this penthouse is my wedding gift to Chris? You think I just walked away from my career because you publicly slapped me?" I laughed, a short, sharp, terrifying sound that instantly startled the attorney and wiped the smugness from Chris's face. "No, I left because the timing was finally, exquisitely perfect for me. I didn't sign their prepared document. Instead, I reached into my surprisingly thin briefcase, retrieved a pre-signed, legally notarized document, and slid it across the polished table. It was the official grant deed already transferred to the new, registered owner 1 week ago. My parents' triumphant smiles dissolved into horrified, agonizing confusion. My mother grabbed the paper, reading the unfamiliar names. "What is this, Melissa? Who signed this?" "I did," I answered, my voice steady, cold, and utterly detached. "I sold the penthouse, fully paid and mortgage-free, exactly 1 week ago, to the one person who could pay all cash and close the deal immediately without a second question." I paused, letting the monumental silence crush them beneath the weight of their own greed. "You never truly cared about me, only the asset. Now, both the daughter and the asset are permanently removed from your control. Neither is yours." My father's jaw literally dropped. The true climax wasn't the violence they inflicted, it was the financial devastation I had meticulously planned and executed in complete solitude. My father was, astonishingly, speechless, which was the first and most satisfying victory. He couldn't speak because his entire, deeply ingrained authority had instantly dissolved. He slowly pointed a trembling finger at the useless deed on the table. "Who did you sell it to? Who in this city buys a $1.5 million home in 1 week without a financing contingency?" The panic in his eyes was palpable. "The kind of person who recognizes a desperate bargain," I said, leaning forward slightly, my voice still a chilling monotone. "I sold the penthouse, mortgage-free, for $1.1 million. That's a $400,000 loss for me." I let the number hang in the air, watching their faces calcify in shock. Why? Because the fastest, most effective way to hurt you wasn't to simply walk away with the asset, but to force you to lose it and to realize you lost it because of your own monstrous greed. My mother shrieked a high, guttural, animal sound of pure material devastation. $400,000. "Melissa, you threw away our money, our family legacy. Are you insane?" Her tears were already flowing, thick and ugly, but they were purely for the financial destruction, never once for the daughter she had driven away. Chris finally spoke, his voice thin, wounded, and deeply accusing. "But the wedding, the mother said you were supposed to sign it over to me as a gift. We already decorated it. Where are we going to live?" His entitlement was rapidly dissolving into utter childish confusion. He genuinely couldn't grasp why his sister's success wasn't his property. I let them wallow in their confusion for a beat. I stood up slowly, looking down at the 3 people who had spent their lives ensuring I felt small. My smile was cold, entirely devoid of warmth. The whole point of my silence was for you to feel secure, to think you had won, to joyfully decorate a beautiful, expensive cage that wasn't yours. You wanted the asset so badly, you never once considered that I was actively controlling the entire transaction. I tapped the red mark on my cheek. The slap was the permission slip. The moment you chose violence over your daughter, you signed off on my revenge. I used the emotional and physical assault they inflicted on me as the legal and moral justification to immediately liquidate the asset they craved, accepting the massive loss to ensure they could never touch it. They were defeated by their own terrible priorities. My mother, finally comprehending the immense $400,000 loss I had willingly incurred to punish them, collapsed into the chair, her composure utterly shattered. Your brother, he was depending on that house, Melissa. He and his wife. You ruined his life. Her tone wasn't one of maternal grief, but of pure, entitled disbelief that I could finally act independently of their approval and their bank accounts. Chris was depending on it because you relentlessly conditioned him to depend on everyone else, I stated flatly, my voice cutting through her hysteria. And speaking of your finances, the ones you desperately hope to fix with my property, I know you pulled a substantial $300,000 out of your retirement savings to finance his extravagant wedding. Correct. My father's face went from enraged red to corpse-like gray. This was my financial trump card, my true reveal. You were counting on selling this penthouse, the one I earned with my isolation, to replenish those emptied retirement accounts and pay off the last, lingering portions of Chris's chronic college debt. Wasn't that the brilliant, selfish plan? I watched as the full weight of their self-inflicted financial exposure crushed them. Chris finally broke, his golden boy arrogance replaced by pure, blinding fear. You can't do this to me. I'm your brother. What about family? His desperation was ugly, based entirely on the expectation of eternal rescue and the belief that the rules of consequence only applied to me. I smiled, a thin, chilling expression of finality. Family? You want to know what family is? Family is who you protect. You protected Chris's comfort. You protected your own hypocritical public image. You protected the $1.5 million asset. I paused, tapping the faint red mark on my cheek. You didn't protect the daughter. You chose violence and greed over blood. I rose from the table, gathering my empty briefcase. Now, here is the cruel truth. Your retirement accounts are drained. Chris has no house, and his new life starts with massive, crushing debt. And you have willingly lost the $400,000 equity buffer I burned through for this revenge. The remaining $1.1 million from the sale is legally mine, and I'm taking every cent. You are now entirely on your own, exactly as you so diligently trained me to be. The attorney, pale and clearly horrified by the family drama, quickly cleared his throat. I think the meeting is unequivocally concluded. The seller has legally transferred the asset, and the purchase funds have been dispersed. He knew, professionally, that their legal recourse was absolutely zero. They had no claim. They were financially naked. I turned my back on them and started walking toward the door. My father, regaining a flash of his old, furious self, lunged out of his seat. But the attorney, showing a surprising degree of moral courage, quickly stepped in front of him, physically blocking his path. I walked out of that glass-walled room, leaving them with their shrieks, their impotent rage, and their complete financial run. But I wasn't done. My final, decisive move wasn't financial, it was social. Before arriving, I had already ensured that the entire wedding guest list, all 200 of their affluent friends, business contacts, and social peers would receive an anonymous, detailed email. This message meticulously described the public assault on me and laid bare the real, disgusting reason the wedding gift of the penthouse was suddenly rescinded. They didn't just lose their money in their son's home, they lost their carefully cultivated public facade. The financial loss would hurt, but the resulting social shame would utterly destroy them. That day, I didn't just walk away, I executed a total, unrepentant divorce from the family and the life they demanded I live. My parents were still staring, utterly shell-shocked, the awful realization of their total, self-inflicted financial loss finally sinking in. I gave them one last gift of brutal honesty, ensuring there would be no doubt about my decision. I won't be at Thanksgiving. I won't be at Christmas. I won't be at any family gathering ever again. I emphasized the last word, allowing it to hang in the air like a final, chilling note of music. My father, the authority figure who had just minutes ago physically assaulted me, was completely defeated. He could only manage a low whisper, "You'll regret this. We're your family, Melissa. You need us." I met his desperate, manipulative gaze, entirely unfazed. "No, you're not my family anymore. You are merely the people I permanently left behind. Regret is what you feel right now. I, on the other hand, feel absolute, unburdened peace." I turned my back on them for the very last time. Walking out of that glass conference room, the opulent lobby suddenly felt vast, empty, and meaningless. The gilded luxury they valued so highly now felt cheap and utterly tainted by their toxic, ugly desperation. Stepping onto the busy sidewalk and hailing a cab, I realized that the $400,000 financial loss I had willingly incurred was, in fact, the cheapest tuition fee I'd ever paid. It bought me not just financial independence, but emotional freedom, total vindication, and the absolute certainty that I was a woman who finally valued herself enough to destroy a corrupt system and walk away from violence. I lost the asset, but I gained my entire life. I sat on the train, watching the familiar city skyline, the place of my trauma and my triumph, finally shrink to a distant, indifferent smudge. The first day of my meticulously planned 6-month sabbatical wasn't about simply resting. It was about processing the colossal weight I had finally severed. The $400,000 loss was the ultimate, necessary fee for my deprogramming, a small, worthwhile price for surgically excising a lifetime of emotional abuse, neglect, and violent entitlement. The immediate fallout for my brother Chris was financially brutal and entirely deserved. Without the $1.5 million penthouse title as immediate collateral, the bank instantly called in the urgent $500,000 bridge loan he had foolishly taken out for the wedding. My parents, in a desperate, last-ditch effort to keep the golden boy out of an inevitable lawsuit or even legal trouble, were immediately forced to liquidate a significant portion of their retirement investments and emergency assets. The very financial security they had sacrificed my well-being to maintain was destroyed, entirely self-inflicted, within a week. The lavish, expensive wedding, the very centerpiece of their greedy plan, went ahead, but it was nothing short of a public disaster. The atmosphere at the reception was thick and poisonous, the expensive designer gowns and hollow, grandiose decorations were tragically hollow props for a family already drowning in the sudden, crushing weight of debt and mutual resentment. Chris and his new wife's faces in the photos were not glowing with love, but were instead a miserable testament to their utter, humiliating financial defeat. My parents, the primary architects of my long-term trauma, found their most poetic punishment in the immediate, irreversible destruction of their own relationship. They couldn't openly blame me for their financial woes without admitting their own toxicity and my justifiable escape. Instead, they could only blame Chris's perpetual incompetence and, more viciously, each other's enabling. Their iron-fisted control over the family narrative and finances was entirely gone, instantly replaced by toxic mutual resentment and the grim prospect of a deeply insecure retirement. The golden boy was now a massive, perpetual liability. Meanwhile, I was gone, vanished without a trace, my new life a complete, serene contrast. I spent my high-end, paid sabbatical backpacking across Southeast Asia, deliberately choosing locations thousands of miles from their entitled reach, truly experiencing life for the first time on my own terms. I didn't have to compulsively check my phone for their calls, and I certainly didn't have to justify a single one of my actions or choices. My remaining $50,000 cash, managed through untraceable accounts, was more than enough for my true freedom and unbridled adventure. The loss of the $400,000 became immaterial. The greatest revenge wasn't the lost money, it was the absolute, unshakable knowledge I carried with me everywhere. I knew without any doubt that I could thrive and survive entirely without them and their abusive system. I had consciously and strategically burned the bridge to my past, but I had simultaneously built a far better, stronger ship for my future. I was no longer the silent, burden-designated saver of the family. I was finally the master builder of my own, uncompromised destiny. My 6-month break was not just a vacation, it was the final, defining act of my independence. The drive home from the penthouse was utterly silent, not with shock, but with cold, mutual accusation. The meticulously maintained facade of the perfect, high-achieving family had completely shattered into irreparable pieces. They weren't grieving the sudden, permanent loss of me, their daughter. They were collectively panicking over the massive, gaping financial holes I'd left behind by liquidating their desired asset. The $500,000 bridge loan was an immediate sword hanging directly over their heads, threatening the entire family's financial stability. My father, the self-proclaimed financial guru who valued control above all else, was utterly humiliated. He was immediately forced to contact the bank, pleading for extensions, and ultimately had to liquidate the emergency savings he'd religiously kept aside for Chris's next inevitable business failure. The shame of being financially exposed and utterly helpless was a visible burden on his face. My mother, having lost her coveted trophy property and facing a grim, ruined retirement, instantly turned her full, poisonous venom on the source of the original entitlement, Chris. This is all your fault. If you'd just managed to be successful like Melissa, we wouldn't need her money. She screamed at him in the kitchen, shattering a glass, her rage purely material, never maternal. Chris, for the first time in his pampered golden life, experienced genuine, external consequences that his parents couldn't instantly fix. He had lost the penthouse he thought he owned, his entire financial safety net was suddenly shredded, and the unconditional love he'd taken for granted was brutally revealed to be nothing more than a fragile, purely financial contract. His golden identity, built on lies and enablement, was now collapsing. The silence I left behind was infinitely louder than any scream I could have uttered. I had successfully created a vacuum of raw, undeniable financial fear and exposed the family's deep moral rot. They were now trapped together, forced to truly look at each other, stripped forever of the comforting, cruel lie that Chris was somehow inherently somehow more than Melissa. The real reckoning was just beginning. My 6 months of absolute freedom were the best, most essential therapy I ever paid for. I didn't spend a single moment regretting the $400,000 loss. That money bought me back my soul and my agency. I returned as a professional at 31 who had surgically reset her life, secure in the unshakable knowledge that she was uncompromised and unbreakable. I walked back into my firm, not as the ambitious subordinate who perpetually craved external validation, but as a confident senior manager with a clear-cut vision, a secured future, and absolute self-worth. My firm didn't dare ask about my 6-month absence. They simply celebrated my return, recognizing the high-value asset they almost lost. And Chris, he was still living at home, his fragile marriage already severely strained by the sudden massive debt. He was forced to work a dead-end, low-paying job, spending every cent he earned paying off the bridge loan that was supposed to fund his imagined glory. He became the very definitive financial failure my parents had spent their entire lives trying to prevent through toxic favoritism and enablement. My parents, the two architects of my lifelong trauma, were tragically trapped in a caustic cycle of blame and mutual resentment, living in quiet, corrosive despair, their hard-won retirement funds significantly drained. They had successfully destroyed their own future by clinging so tightly to their toxic, outdated, and ultimately self-defeating ideas of family entitlement. They lost their financial security the moment they chose an asset over their daughter. I received one last, desperate cold call from my father months after my return. He didn't offer an apology or a reconciliation. He simply asked for one thing: money, disguised as a loan. I let the phone ring until the silence returned. Silence was my ultimate victory. I had earned my peace. I stood tall, not just because I was financially secure and professionally indispensable, but because I had successfully stared down the violence, the entitlement, and the emotional blackmail, and I had won. I had liquidated the symbol of my labor to destroy their control, only to rebuild something stronger. My self-worth was finally, truly my own. The greatest revenge of all was the ability to simply and completely walk away, knowing they couldn't follow. The air in that cold, glass-walled conference room was immediately toxic the moment the truth dropped. My father, that aging Titan-manufactured authority, quickly regained his voice, but he didn't threaten me. He redirected his rage and his threats toward the terrified, silent lawyer. He was desperately grasping for control where there was none left, trying to bully the witness into somehow undoing the irreversible legal paperwork. Chris just sat there, his mouth agape, his face a sickening mix of confusion and fear, finally realizing that he, the golden boy, was the one truly left exposed and liable. I didn't linger to watch them process their monumental defeat. I simply picked up my briefcase, gave them a nod of profound, surgical disinterest, and walked out of the room. They didn't follow me. They were far too busy tearing each other apart, father blaming son, mother blaming father over the cold, hard, financial paperwork I had deliberately left scattered on the table. Their material loss was already more important than the daughter they had finally lost forever. The very next day, the inevitable onslaught began. Since I had deliberately destroyed my old phone and its SIM card, they had to scramble, finding ways to contact my old work email and even the backup burner phone number I had only ever given to my firm's HR department. The first set of calls weren't true threats. They were pathetic, calculated pleas for pity cloaked in manipulative false maternal concern. My mother's voice, thick with artificial high-pitched tears, would fill the voicemail. "Melissa, honey, we're so incredibly worried about your mental health. This impulsive decision to sell your home and disappear means you're obviously unwell and unstable. Please call us so we can help you find a nice therapist and get you settled back into your life." It was a classic, insidious attempt at gaslighting, trying to label my calculated self-rescue as a sign of insanity. My father quickly followed up, his tone immediately harsher, more direct, and radiating that familiar patriarchal intimidation. "This level of disrespect is completely unacceptable. You have committed financial fraud against the family's interests. If you don't return our calls and immediately transfer the sale proceeds to the joint family account, we will have absolutely no choice but to pursue criminal charges, Melissa. Think about your future." He failed to grasp that my future was the very thing I was fighting for, and that any public lawsuit would destroy their carefully curated social reputation, not mine. I listened to these desperate, predictable messages while sipping a perfectly brewed coffee in a quiet, anonymous cafe miles away from the city. They fundamentally didn't understand the first, most crucial rule of high finance and property law. The deed was unequivocally in my name, and I sold it legally to an independent, unaware third party. Their legal claim was civil at best, but the potential for public exposure was something they could never, ever risk. Then came the message from Chris, which was, predictably, the most despicable, a long, sniveling, self-pitying whine about his ruined wedding and his poor, debt-ridden wife. "You knew how much this penthouse meant to us, Melissa. You have to help us out of this. Dad is going to lose everything because of you, Melissa. Please don't let Dad bankrupt himself. It's not too late to help your brother. He was weaponizing my father's potential ruin to try and provoke my old sense of obligation. I asked myself one simple, clarifying question: if the roles were perfectly reversed, if Chris had succeeded, and I was the one drowning in financial ruin and familial rejection, would he have sold his asset, even at a massive loss, to save me? The answer, cold and absolute, was a definitive, clinical no. He would have watched me fail, justifying it as my own fault. My decades-long, deeply ingrained sense of compassion and obligation for them evaporated completely. I didn't delete the messages. I immediately downloaded and saved them. They were perfect, irrefutable evidence of their continued emotional abuse, financial coercion, and attempted blackmail. They were my insurance policy. Then, with a profound sense of self-protection, I blocked every single communication channel, every burner number, every email alias. I returned, finally, to the beautiful, unassailable silence I had spent 30 years earning. The fight was over, the battle won, and the war for my soul was closed. They were left to stew in their own moral and financial rot, while I was free to rebuild, unburdened. The only institution in my life that truly treated me like a valued human being, rather than a disposable financial asset, was ironically my corporate workplace. When I initiated the negotiation for my 6-month sabbatical, my executives didn't question my motives or demand details about my personal crisis. They simply recognized my value and offered the deep, quiet support I had never once received at home. Their commitment to my future, even when I was absent, was a powerful confirmation that I had bet on the right team. While I was gone, backpacking across Southeast Asia, my closest professional friend, Sarah, acted as my She fielded my parents' frantic, delusional inquiries with calm professionalism. They would call her workplace, asking if I was safe, if I was mentally sound, and where my current location was. Sarah didn't offer details. She offered a firm, protective, and impenetrable wall. She valued my peace, my health, and my safety far more than my parents valued my presence or my well-being. That was the purest form of love I had ever known. This entire traumatic experience taught me one fundamental, life-altering truth: family isn't merely blood, it's genuine, reciprocal action and respect. The true work of my sabbatical wasn't just physical travel. It was establishing a new inner circle, a genuine support network built on mutual trust, not fragile, toxic obligation. I consciously started cultivating deep relationships with people who genuinely celebrated my success without demanding any ownership of it, and who saw my pain without leveraging it for manipulation. The stark contrast was the final, undeniable key to my healing process. My parents only ever gave me their conditional, performance-based love when I was actively serving their financial agenda or shielding Chris from consequences. My friends and professional allies gave me their unqualified support when I was at my most vulnerable, most unreachable, and most financially destructive to my own past self. That realization that quiet, genuine support existed outside the trauma bond was the final, powerful validation I needed. I no longer needed their approval because I had found the new foundation of my life, built on respect, loyalty, and the kind of unconditional support that is earned, not inherited. I realized I was not alone, I was simply free. I didn't rush out to buy another luxurious high-end penthouse. The goal was never accumulation, the goal was control and peace. Instead, I rented a beautifully functional, smaller apartment downtown. It was modest, far from the multi-million-dollar asset I'd liquidated, yet it felt infinitely more valuable. It was entirely mine. No cosigner, no family interference, just a space I chose, funded, and decorated with a genuine sense of personal ownership. It wasn't the $1.5 million cage they had built for me. It was my $2,000 a month sanctuary. It smelled of possibility, not expectation. My return to the firm after the sabbatical was a swift, true ascension. The 6-month break, dedicated to travel, self-reflection, and healing, had sharpened my professional focus and eliminated all the internal doubt they had instilled. I was promoted to senior director within a year, now running the exact high-stakes division my father had always meticulously trained me for, intending for me to hand it over to Chris. I had achieved their dream for me, but entirely without their debilitating control. Every success I earned now was a direct, tangible repudiation of their authority. My revenge was now fully materialized and complete. Chris, the eternal golden boy, was the ultimate, tragic casualty of their system. He eventually had to declare personal bankruptcy, his reputation in the social and professional circles they valued utterly ruined by the scandal surrounding the failed transfer and the crippling debt. His shallow, material-driven marriage collapsed. The bride left him, citing his inability to provide stability. My parents, now living on a sharply fixed, significantly diminished income, were trapped in a cycle of endless, corrosive recrimination, pointing fingers at each other relentlessly in their old, silent house. They had successfully destroyed their own future security by clinging so desperately to their toxic, outdated ideas of family power and favoritism. The core lesson I carried forward wasn't about the money or the humiliation of the public slap. It was a profound, life-saving truth. To finally achieve genuine autonomy, you must be willing to strategically burn your old life down to stop toxic people from perpetually controlling your future. They didn't truly fear my professional failure, which they could have exploited. They feared my absolute, unassailable independence, because an independent Melissa was an uncontrollable asset. They tried to contact me one last, desperate time, nearly a year after the confrontation. They didn't apologize or seek reconciliation. They sent a formal, demanding lawyer letter requesting immediate access to my new family address for necessary legal purposes. It was a final, utterly predictable attempt at control and invasion of my hard-won privacy. I responded with 2 typed words, sent via certified mail, that surgically severed the last fragile string, cease and desist. That letter was the final closing of the door, the final lock on the cage they could never re-enter. I had earned my peace, paid for it with $400,000 and 30 years of emotional labor. I stood tall, not just because I was financially secure and professionally ascending, but because I had stared down the violence, the naked entitlement, and the emotional blackmail of my biological family, and I had emphatically, strategically won. I looked at my small, sunlit apartment, my thriving career, and my circle of genuine friends. My self-worth was finally, truly my own, entirely disconnected from their approval. My new life was the best revenge of all. The first year after I sent the final, definitive cease and desist letter was, paradoxically, the hardest. Not because I missed the toxic chaos I didn't but because I was spending every waking moment deliberately unlearning a lifetime of reflexive obligation and emotional subordination. The silence that replaced their frantic communication was often deafening, a huge echoing void, yet it was undeniably, gloriously mine. This period required intense self-discipline to enforce the absolute no-contact rule. Every unsolicited email attempt to reach me, every pathetic attempt by them to contact Sarah or other colleagues was met with a rigid, impenetrable wall of intentional silence. I saved the documentation, but I refused to engage. I knew my greatest vulnerability wasn't their legal retaliation, it was my own deep-seated, trained in childhood weakness for their manipulative pleas. I quickly realized that my family simply couldn't grasp the concept of no contact. In their deeply narcissistic worldview, where I existed solely to serve their needs, I was not allowed to unilaterally leave the established family narrative. They genuinely believed my silence was a temporary, attention-seeking punishment, a dramatic display that would eventually yield to their authority, rather than a permanent, calculated, surgical exit. Their confusion was evidence that their illusion of control had completely crumbled. The fallout was a slow-motion, self-inflicted disaster. I heard years later through a distant, neutral acquaintance who had no vested interest in the drama that Chris's second, highly funded business attempt had predictably failed. My father finally and definitively refused to bail him out, not because he had miraculously learned a valuable lesson about enablement, but because he literally couldn't afford the immense social shame of another widely publicized failure that would further expose his reduced financial circumstances. My revenge didn't just strip them of their wealth and property, it stripped Chris of his safety net, which was the actual engine of his entitlement. The permanent absence of my labor, my assets, and my income meant the total, final collapse of his inherited privilege. Chris was forced to face the crushing reality that, without my decades of financial support and my parents' aggressive protection, he was, fundamentally, profoundly ordinary. My mother, who valued social standing and material appearances above every other human trait, found her life's true punishment in the subtle, corrosive decline of her social prestige. She was left with a diminished social status and an angry, financially ruined husband who blamed her equally for enabling Chris. The one thing she had sacrificed her daughter's happiness for social prestige was the very thing she lost forever as the whispers about their financial difficulties and the scandal of the penthouse sale spread through their elite circles. The house they lived in, while still large, became a tomb of mutual resentment and quiet, corrosive despair, their retirement downgraded, their reputation tainted. I eventually moved into a beautiful, quiet home I bought entirely on my own, securing the mortgage with my own exceptional, independent credit history and my thriving career. There was a profound philosophical closure in the years of absolute silence. My story is not ultimately about property, money, or revenge. It is about drawing a clean, uncrossable line in the sand and saying, with full authority, you will not use me anymore. My life is not your resource. The $400,000 I willingly sacrificed to force their hand was, without hyperbole, the most ethical, high-value investment I ever made. It was the cost of purchasing my own soul back from their toxic generational debt. My final victory was the fact that, to them, I became nothing more than a ghost who was happier, wealthier, and freer than they could ever comprehend. I spent the subsequent years processing the profound, world-altering fact that my life wasn't, as I had believed for 3 decades, a failure, a disappointment, or a perpetual state of inadequacy. It was, in reality, a long, arduous, and necessary self-rescue mission. I didn't lose $400,000 in a fit of rage. I strategically invested that sum into a future free from their toxic emotional and financial bankruptcy. The genuine turning point wasn't the final, climactic property sale, it was the quiet, steel-enforced decision I made the second their hands connected with my face, the decision to protect myself, regardless of the cost to them or the temporary financial cost to me. My journey taught me that sometimes, to stop a relentless, generational toxic cycle, you have to be the one strong enough and cold enough to make the hardest, most ruthless choice, the one that society and family pressure you into avoiding. The public slap wasn't just physical pain, it was the ultimate, necessary catalyst. It was the visual proof that allowed me to fully accept the level of surgical ruthlessness required to escape their gravitational pull forever. I looked at the bruise and accepted the dark, necessary truth. Their system was violence, and only a calculated, decisive act could sever the connection. Crucially, I found my true, intentional family in my chosen connections, the colleagues who became genuine friends, the mentors who evolved into trusted confidantes, and the professional peers who celebrated my triumphs without demanding any ownership of them. They consistently saw my intrinsic value, not my utility as a resource. They were the true architects of my new, healthy emotional foundation. I learned that you don't owe loyalty to people who exploit your loyalty. You owe loyalty to those who honor and reciprocate it. As for my biological family, I never had direct contact with them again. The silence was absolute. I heard, through the same distant acquaintance, that they continued their cycle of financial desperation and relentless mutual blame. My father retired prematurely under a cloud of humiliation. My mother was trapped in a relationship she loathed, forced to live a drastically downgraded life. They taught me the final, crushing lesson: toxic people rarely fundamentally change. They only trade one victim for another, or they turn on each other when the primary victim escapes. My absence didn't heal them, it just shifted the abuse internally. To anyone watching this, if you recognize yourself as the designated saver, the perpetual peacekeeper, or the primary financial and emotional caretaker in your own family dynamic, please understand this: your personal resources, your time, your money, and your sanity are not infinite, and your obligation to abuse is zero. Your first, most fundamental, and fiercest loyalty must always be to yourself and to the future you want to build. My turning point was the moment I stopped asking, "How can I fix them?" and started demanding, "How can I save me?" I look at my life now, my professional success, my profound inner calm, my debt-free, sunlit small apartment, the friends I cherish, and I know, with every fiber of my being, that I made the only right choice. My name is Melissa, and this entire story of family revenge was, in its deepest, most profound sense, truly a story of radical, necessary self-love and ultimate liberation. I wake up every single day in my small sunlit space, and I am instantly reminded that peace isn't passively given, it must be actively, fiercely claimed. I paid a definitive price for my peace, not just with the $400,000, but with the courage to definitively choose myself over their toxic, relentless expectations. I chose my sanity over their approval, and that choice remains the most profitable investment of my entire life. Some might look at the narrative from the outside and judge me, calling me petty, vengeful, or financially foolish for accepting a loss. But what is $400,000 when measured against the cost of a lifetime of emotional servitude, perpetual anxiety, and the systematic erosion of your self-worth? The investment was a surgical severance that secured my mental and emotional freedom forever. It was a bargain. I hope this story serves as more than just a typical revenge fantasy or fleeting entertainment. I hope it becomes a practical, actionable blueprint for others. If your blood family persistently demands that you shrink your success, silence your voice, and subvert your entire life to fit their abusive narrative, you have the ultimate, non-negotiable right and the moral obligation to strategically expand your life and choose a new, healthier family dynamic. The pain of the separation will eventually fade, and the lost money can be and will be remade. But the pure, raw courage to walk away from the people who intentionally hurt you is the single most precious, powerful asset you will ever own. Do not be afraid to leave them completely alone with the heavy, terrible consequences that they themselves created. That, more than any action, is the true, final turning point toward lasting self-liberation. My journey, with its extreme financial stakes and dramatic confrontation, was unique, but the core emotional issue is absolutely universal. Toxic people thrive on silence, secrecy, and the willing servitude of their victims. If you've been the designated saver, the scapegoat, or felt that constant, heavy pressure to shrink yourself to fit a toxic family narrative, it's time to move from victim to victor. You don't need revenge to win, you need definitive liberation. Here are the 5 core lessons I learned from destroying my past and building my future. First, acknowledge the abuse. Stop rationalizing their destructive behavior. Their actions are not love, they are control. Second, document everything. Every manipulative text, every email, every threat, these are your legal and emotional shields. Never rely on the fragile hope that they will change. Rely only on cold, hard evidence. Third, and this is crucial, your money is your mobility. Financial independence is the only reliable escape hatch. If you are the saver, save for your quiet, permanent exit, not for their inevitable financial comfort. Build your own private, untraceable security fund. Fourth, be willing to burn the bridge. Closure isn't about reconciliation, it's about drawing an absolute line and accepting the necessary, painful finality. Don't leave a single string attached. Fifth, invest fiercely in your chosen family. Actively seek out and rely on the people who celebrate your innate value, not your utility. That reciprocal, supportive network is your true, unassailable wealth. Don't wait for permission to be happy, financially secure, or emotionally free. The absolute best revenge is living a great, authentic life that they have absolutely no access to and no control over. If this story resonated, hit the like button to support the message, subscribe for more stories of self-liberation, and tell me in the comments below, what's the one toxic family expectation you are ready to permanently walk away from today?